Welcome to Moon's Fairy Tales. Today, we're revisiting an epic story with a fresh voice and new narrative and a fresh new chapter of Shadows of Eregion. Join us as we dive deeper into the untold adventures of Celebrimbor, the Elven smith whose creations shape Middle-earth. With new twists and a darker edge, this remake will pull you into the heart of mystery, betrayal, and ancient power. So, sit back, relax, and let the Shadows of Eregion draw you in. Part 1. The Shadows of Eregion. Eregion, the land of ancient beauty, lay nestled beneath the towering peaks of the misty mountains. Its forests, dense with tall trees and dappled sunlight, stretched far and wide. Rivers wove through the land like silver threads, and in the heart of it all stood Ost-in-Edhil, the city of the Elven smiths. The forges there sang with the music of metal and fire, a place where hands worked wonders that shaped the world. Among those hands was the young Celebrimbor, grandson of Fëanor, inheritor of the Noldor's most gifted craftsman. Celebrimbor had always been different from the other apprentices. Where others saw iron and steel, he saw possibility. His hands moved with a precision that belied his youth, shaping metal into forms of beauty and power. Yet, despite his talents, Celebrimbor remained curious, a thirst for knowledge that could not be sated by mere crafting alone. It was on one of these days, when the world seemed at peace, that Celebrimbor found himself walking through the forests of Eregion. By his side walked Galdr, his fellow apprentice, who watched with a mixture of admiration and jealousy. Celebrimbor's easy mastery of the forge had always made Galdr feel smaller, less significant, though he never let it show. Trailing behind them was Elenwe, a maiden of Rivendell, who had come to Eregion to study under the masters. Elenwe was quiet but sharp, her mind always turning over ancient lore and forgotten tales. She had taken a liking to Celebrimbor. His kindness and his passion for the mysteries of the world had drawn her to him like a moth to flame. They walked deeper into the forest that day than they had ever gone before, drawn by an unspoken urge, as if something was calling to them. The trees seemed taller here, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes, blocking out the sunlight. The air was heavy, and even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. "Do you feel that?" Celebrimbor asked, his voice low, as if afraid to disturb whatever unseen force lurked in the shadows. Galdr shrugged, though his eyes darted nervously around the darkening woods. "It's just the forest," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Elenwe stepped forward, her gaze fixed on something ahead. "There," she whispered. "Do you see it?" In the clearing before them, half buried in the earth, was something unnatural. It gleamed faintly, a metal unlike any they had seen before. It seemed to drink the light, casting no reflection, as if it was made from the very essence of darkness itself. Celebrimbor knelt beside it, brushing away the dirt with careful hands. The metal was cold to the touch, and as he held it, he felt a strange energy pulse through his fingers. It was powerful, ancient, and something more. Something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "What is this?" Elenwe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Celebrimbor didn't answer immediately. He stared at the metal, entranced, feeling as though it was whispering to him, though the words were too faint to understand. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't know. But we must take it back with us." Galdr frowned, stepping back. "We shouldn't meddle with things we don't understand. This doesn't feel right." Celebrimbor looked at him sharply. "Are you afraid, Galdr?" The question hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Galder stiffened, his pride pricked. "No," he said quickly. "But there are things in this world that even the Noldor cannot control." Elenwe stepped between them, her voice calm and measured. "Whatever this is, we must be careful. We do not know what powers we are dealing with." But Celebrimbor was already lost in thought, his mind racing with possibilities. What could he create with this? What wonders could be forged from something so rare, so powerful? They returned to Ost-in-Edhil as the sun began to set, but the discovery of the dark metal had already changed something. The city seemed different, quieter, as if it was holding its breath. The shadows that gathered in the corners of the streets seemed longer, darker, and the familiar warmth of Eregion felt cold. That night, as Celebrimbor lay in his bed, he dreamt. But his dreams were not of light and beauty. They were of shadows, of whispers, of a deep, unending darkness that seemed to reach out for him. And at the center of it all, he saw the metal, glowing faintly with that same dark light. He awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. He sat up in bed, glancing around the darkened room. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move in the corner, but when he blinked, it was gone. Yet the feeling remained, an icy presence that seemed to linger in the very air he breathed. Celebrimbor looked down at his hands, still stained with the dirt from the forest, and for the first time in his life, he felt afraid. The days that followed were no easier. Strange things began happening in the city. The light seemed dimmer, the shadows longer. Whispers echoed in the streets, though no one could say where they came from. Some claimed they saw dark figures moving in the forest at night, but when they looked again, there was nothing there. Celebrimbor could not shake the feeling that something was watching him, something that had been awakened by the metal they had found. He kept it hidden, but its presence seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, as if it was waiting for something, or someone. Galder and Elenwe noticed the change in him, the way he grew more distant, more withdrawn. They spoke to him, tried to warn him, but Celebrimbor would not listen. His mind was consumed by the possibilities, by the power that metal held. He began to spend more time in the forge, his hands itching to shape it, to create something truly great. But in the deepest part of his heart, a whisper remained, a whisper that told him that whatever he created would come with a price. And in the shadows of Eregion, the darkness only grew stronger. Part 2. The Whispering Dark. The deep forests of Eregion had always been a place of beauty, but now they seemed tainted by an unseen presence. The trees, once full of life, whispered of things unseen. The air was colder, heavier, as if the very breath of the earth had stilled. And beneath the city of Ost-in-Edhil, in the hidden chambers where Celebrimbor worked in secret, the darkness grew. Celebrimbor's days were consumed by the forge. He kept the dark metal hidden from the other smiths, working late into the night when all others slept. His hands moved with a feverish energy, shaping the metal into intricate forms, each more beautiful and more terrifying than the last. Yet no matter what he created, it was never enough. The metal seemed to whisper to him as he worked, urging him to forge something greater, something that would surpass all the works of his forebears. And always, in his dreams, she came to him, Morwen, the mysterious elf with eyes as dark as the night sky and a voice like the wind through dead leaves. She appeared in the shadowed corners of his mind, her words soft but insistent. "Forge it, Celebrimbor," she whispered. "Forge it, and the world will be yours." He would wake in a cold sweat, the echo of her words lingering in his ears. The dreams grew more frequent, more vivid, until he could no longer tell where his thoughts ended and hers began. He could see her even when he was awake, her form flickering at the edges of his vision, always just out of reach. "What do you want from me?" he would whisper into the darkness, but there was never an answer, only the ever-present whisper of the metal, calling to him, beckoning him deeper into the abyss. It was during one of these restless nights that the lion, the reclusive elf lord, came to him. The lion was older than most in Ost-in-Edhil, a figure of wisdom and mystery who rarely left his tower. His eyes were sharp, and his presence commanded respect, even from those who knew little of him. He found Celebrimbor in the forge, his hands blackened with soot, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. The lion stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the younger elf work before he finally spoke. "You are playing with fire, Celebrimbor," he said, his voice low and steady. Celebrimbor barely looked up. "I know what I'm doing," he replied, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his words. The lion stepped closer, his gaze falling on the half-finished object on the anvil. It was a ring, though unlike any ring Celebrimbor had crafted before. The metal seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its dark glow casting strange shadows on the walls. "No," the lion said softly. "You do not." Celebrimbor finally turned to face him, irritation flashing in his eyes. "What do you know of it?" the lion. "This metal, it holds power beyond anything we've ever seen. I can forge something that will change the world." The alien's expression remained calm, but there was a sadness in his eyes, a sorrow that came from knowing too much. "Power is a dangerous thing, Celebrimbor, and not all power is meant to be wielded. The metal you have found, it is not of this world. It comes from a place of darkness, from a time when even the stars were young. It was never meant to be found, let alone shaped by elven hands." Celebrimbor clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. "You're wrong," he said, though his voice wavered. "This is my destiny. I was meant to find it, meant to forge something great." The lion shook his head. "Destiny is a cruel master. It does not care for the hearts of those it chooses. I have seen this before, Celebrimbor. I have seen the darkness that lies beyond the light, and I fear that you are walking a path from which there is no return." For a moment, Celebrimbor hesitated. The words of the old elf seemed to pierce through the fog that clouded his mind, bringing with them a clarity he had not felt in weeks. But then, from the shadows, he heard it, the whisper. Morwen's voice, soft and seductive, filling his mind with promises of power, of glory, of things beyond his wildest dreams. "Do not listen to him, Celebrimbor," she whispered. "He is afraid of what you will become. You are destined for greatness. Forge the ring, and all will be yours." The hesitation vanished. Celebrimbor's jaw tightened, and he turned away from the lion, picking up his hammer once more. "You may leave," he said coldly. "I have work to do." The lion stood there for a long moment, watching the younger elf, his heart heavy with sorrow. He could see the darkness taking root in Celebrimbor's soul, twisting him, bending him to its will. But there was nothing more he could do. With a sigh, he turned and left the forge, disappearing into the night. As the days passed, Celebrimbor's obsession grew. He spent every waking moment in the forge, shaping the metal, trying to unlock its secrets. The whispers in his mind grew louder, more insistent, driving him to the brink of madness. His dreams became nightmares, visions of a world consumed by darkness, of shadows that stretched across the land, blotting out the light. And always, at the center of it all, was the ring. The ring he was forging. The ring that would change everything. Elenwe and Galder grew increasingly concerned. They could see the toll it was taking on him, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he wasn't working. They tried to talk to him, tried to pull him back from the edge, but Celebrimbor would not listen. He was too far gone, too consumed by the power of the metal. One night, after another failed attempt to reason with him, Elenwe turned to Galder, her eyes filled with fear. "We're losing him, Galder," she whispered. "He's slipping away." Galder nodded grimly. "I know. But what can we do? He won't listen to us. He's blinded by his own ambition." Elenwe looked away, her heart heavy with sorrow. She had seen this before, seen what unchecked ambition could do to even the noblest of souls. And she feared that Celebrimbor was no different. "We have to do something," she said softly, "before it's too late." But even as she spoke, she knew that the darkness had already taken root. And in the shadows of Eregion, something old and powerful stirred, waiting for the moment to strike. Part 3. The Dread Forge. The forge had changed. Where once it had been a place of creation, of light and warmth, it now stood as a shrine to something darker. The fires, once golden and bright, now burned with a sickly green hue, casting twisted shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of metal and something else, something rotten, as if the very essence of the forge had been tainted by an unseen force. Celebrimbor stood at the heart of it all, his eyes hollow, his hands moving with a mechanical precision that no longer seemed entirely his own. He had lost track of time. Days, weeks, perhaps even months had passed since he had found the dark metal in the forest. But it didn't matter. All that mattered was the work. The creation. The forging. The ring lay before him on the anvil, gleaming with a dark, unnatural light. It was a thing of terrible beauty, its surface smooth and flawless, yet somehow wrong, as if it had been shaped not by hands, but by the will of something ancient and malevolent. Celebrimbor stared at it, entranced, feeling the pull of its power like a physical force. And then, from the shadows, it came, the voice. It had no form, no face, but its presence was unmistakable. It whispered to him, soft and insidious, wrapping itself around his mind like a serpent. "You have done well, Celebrimbor," the voice said, its tone smooth and oily. "The ring is but the first step. There is so much more you can create, so much more power to be gained." Celebrimbor clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was wrong, knew that he was meddling with forces beyond his control. But the voice promised him things he had only ever dreamed of. Knowledge beyond that of any elven master. Power that could rival even the Vala themselves. "I don't want power," he whispered, though his voice was weak, uncertain. "Oh, but you do," the voice purred. "You seek it, even if you do not know it. You crave it, as all who forge do. You wish to shape the world to your will, to create things that will last beyond the turning of the stars. The ring is but the beginning. There are other things you can make, things that will grant you dominion over all you see." Celebrimbor's hands trembled as he reached for the ring. His mind screamed at him to stop, to throw it into the fire and be done with it. But the voice was so persuasive, so convincing. "Put it on," it whispered. "Feel the power that lies within. It is yours, Celebrimbor. Yours to command." Slowly, almost against his will, Celebrimbor slipped the ring onto his finger. The moment it touched his skin, a surge of energy coursed through him, so intense that it nearly knocked him off his feet. It was like nothing he had ever felt before, pure, raw power that seemed to fill every fiber of his being. His vision blurred, and for a moment he saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, shaped by his hand, bent to his will. But with that power came something else, something darker. A deep, hollow feeling settled in his chest, as if something precious had been taken from him, something he could never get back. He gasped, clutching his chest, but the feeling only grew stronger, spreading through him like a poison. "Do not fear," the voice said soothingly. "This is only the beginning. The pain will pass, and in its place, you will find strength. You will be the greatest smith who ever lived. The world will bow to your creations." Celebrimbor sank to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could feel the power of the ring, feel it coursing through his veins, but it was not the power he had imagined. It was something colder, darker, something that twisted and corrupted everything it touched. And yet, he could not bring himself to take it off. The pull was too strong, the temptation too great. Elenwe watched from the shadows, her heart breaking as she saw what Celebrimbor had become. She had followed him to the forge that night, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. And now, as she watched him kneel before the anvil, the ring glowing darkly on his finger, she knew that her worst fears had come true. She stepped forward, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "Celebrimbor," she called softly, hoping to reach the part of him that was still himself. "Please, take it off. This isn't you. This isn't what you wanted." Celebrimbor looked up at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of pain and longing. For a moment, it seemed as though he might listen, as though the darkness had not fully consumed him. But then the voice returned, stronger than before, drowning out all other thoughts. "She does not understand," it hissed. "She fears what you are becoming. But you must not listen to her. She would have you throw away everything you have worked for. She would have you remain weak, powerless." Celebrimbor's eyes darkened, and he rose to his feet, the ring glowing brighter with each passing moment. "You don't understand, Elenwe," he said, his voice cold and distant. "This is my destiny. This is what I was meant to do." Elenwe shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Celebrimbor. This isn't you. The metal, the ring, it's changing you. Please, take it off, before it's too late." But Celebrimbor could not hear her. The voice had taken hold of him, twisting his thoughts, bending his will to its own. He stepped forward, the ring pulsing with power, and Elenwe felt a cold dread settle in her heart. She had lost him, lost the man she loved to the darkness that now consumed him. In a final act of desperation, she reached for him, trying to pull the ring from his finger. But the moment her hand touched it, a surge of energy shot through her, throwing her back with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. She gasped, struggling to regain her footing, but the darkness was already closing in, wrapping itself around her like a shroud. "Elenwe." Celebrimbor's voice broke through the haze, and for a moment the spell was broken. He rushed to her side, his heart pounding with fear and regret. But even as he reached for her, the voice whispered in his ear, cold and unforgiving. "She is weak. She would only hold you back. You must let her go, Celebrimbor. You must embrace your destiny." Celebrimbor hesitated, his hand hovering over hers. The darkness was calling to him, pulling him deeper into its grasp. But somewhere, deep within, a part of him still fought against it, a part of him that remembered who he was and what he had once stood for. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." And then, with a final, desperate effort, he tore the ring from his finger and threw it across the room. The darkness receded, and for a moment, the forge was silent. Celebrimbor fell to his knees beside Elenwi, his heart heavy with sorrow. But the damage had already been done. The nameless voice had planted its seed, and though the ring now lay discarded, its power still lingered in the air, waiting for the moment to strike again. In the shadows of Eregion, the darkness stirred once more, and Celebrimbor knew that his fight was far from over. Part 4: The Shadow's Claim. Ost-in-Edhil, once a beacon of elven craftsmanship and beauty, was now a city besieged by an unseen terror. Darkness crept through its streets, coiling around the great towers and spilling into the hearts of its people. The fires of the forges, once symbols of the city's skill, now flickered weakly, their light unable to hold back the ever-growing shadows. The lion stood at the edge of the city, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the first tendrils of darkness had begun to rise. He had sensed it coming long before the others, the subtle shift in the air, the whispers carried on the wind, the feeling of something ancient awakening beneath the earth. And now, that darkness had finally arrived, spreading through a region like a poison. "We cannot hold it back for much longer," one of the guards said, his voice trembling with fear. "The darkness, it's everywhere. The people are losing hope." The lion nodded grimly. He had tried to warn them, tried to prepare them for what was coming, but the shadows were unlike anything they had ever faced. This was not a physical enemy, not something they could fight with swords and arrows. It was a force older than the city itself, a power that sought to consume everything in its path. "The curse must be broken," the lion said, his voice low and resolute. "If we do not find this source, the darkness will claim us all." He turned and made his way through the streets of Ost-in-Edhil, his mind racing with possibilities. The metal, the ring. Celebrimbor. He had known from the beginning that Celebrimbor's discovery was dangerous, that the dark metal was more than just a curiosity. And now, he feared that the young elf had unwittingly unleashed something far worse. As he approached the forge, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The once grand building now stood as a monument to Celebrimbor's folly, its walls darkened by the strange fires that burned within. The lion hesitated for a moment before pushing open the doors and stepping inside. The sight that greeted him was one of despair. The forge, once alive with light and heat, was now a place of twisted shadows. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and something else, something foul and unnatural. And at the center of it all stood Celebrimbor, his hands trembling as he stared at the ring that lay on the anvil. "Celebrimbor," the lion called out, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. Celebrimbor looked up, his eyes hollow and distant. The ring glowed darkly before him, its presence almost tangible in the air. "I tried to stop it," Celebrimbor whispered, his voice barely audible. But it's too late. The darkness, it's inside me. I can't control it. The lion stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the young elf. It's not too late, Celebrimbor. The ring, destroy it, and the darkness will lose its hold. Celebrimbor shook his head, his hands tightening into fists. You don't understand. The ring, it's part of me now. I can't destroy it. I tried, but every time I get close, it calls to me, pulls me back. The lion could see the struggle in Celebrimbor's eyes, the fight between the elf he once was and the darkness that now consumed him. He knew that the only way to save him and the city was to break the ring's hold, but he also knew that Celebrimbor could not do it alone. Let me help you, the lion said softly, reaching out his hand. We can do this together. The darkness doesn't have to win. For a moment, it seemed as though Celebrimbor might take his hand, might fight back against the darkness that had claimed him. But then, from the shadows, the voice returned, cold and insistent, whispering words of power and control. Do not listen to him, Celebrimbor, the voice hissed. He seeks to weaken you, to take what is rightfully yours. The power of the ring is yours to command. With it, you can become greater than any who came before you. You can rule the world. Celebrimbor's eyes darkened, and he pulled away from the lion, the ring glowing brighter in his hands. No. I can't. I won't let it go. Thalian's heart sank. He could see the darkness tightening its grip on Celebrimbor, pulling him further away from the light. But he could not give up, not yet. Then let me bear it, the lion said, his voice firm. If you cannot destroy it, then give it to me. I will take this burden from you. Celebrimbor looked at him, his eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. For a moment, he hesitated, the ring heavy in his hands. But then the voice returned, stronger than ever, drowning out all reason. No. You are the master of the ring, Celebrimbor. No one else can wield it as you can. If you give it up, you will lose everything. Do not be weak. With a cry of anguish, Celebrimbor clutched the ring to his chest, his body trembling as the darkness surged through him. The lion took a step back, his heart heavy with sorrow. He knew then that Celebrimbor was lost, that the ring had claimed him, just as it was claiming the city. Meanwhile, Elenwe rode through the darkened woods of Eregion, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She had left Ost-in-Edhil days ago, seeking counsel from Elrond and Rivendell. But now, as the shadows closed in around her, she feared that she might be too late. The journey had been perilous, dark shapes moved in the trees, whispers echoed through the air, and the very ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet. But she could not turn back. She had to reach Rivendell, had to find a way to save Celebrimbor before the darkness consumed him completely. When she finally arrived at the gates of Rivendell, she was greeted by Elrond himself, his eyes filled with concern as he saw the state she was in. Elenwe, he said softly, what has happened? The darkness, she gasped, barely able to catch her breath. It's spreading. Celebrimbor, he's lost. The ring, the metal. Please, you have to help us. Elrond's expression grew grim as he listened to her tale. He had sensed the growing darkness in the world, but now he knew that it had taken root in Eregion and that it was spreading faster than he had feared. Rest for a moment, he said gently, guiding her inside. We will find a way to stop this. but time is running short. Eleni nodded weakly, her body trembling from exhaustion and fear. She had come this far, but she knew that the true battle was still ahead. And as she sat in the halls of Rivendell, she could not shake the feeling that the darkness was already too powerful, that even with Elrond's help, they might not be able to save Celebrimbor or Eregion. Back in Ost-in-Edhil, Galdr stood in the doorway of the forge, his heart heavy with grief. He had watched as his friend, Celebrimbor, had fallen deeper and deeper into the shadows, consumed by the power of the ring. He had tried to reach him, tried to pull him back from the edge, but nothing had worked. Now, as the city crumbled around them, Galdr knew that there was only one thing left to do. With a deep breath, he stepped into the forge, his eyes fixed on Celebrimbor, who stood at the center of the room, the ring glowing in his hands. Celebrimbor, he called out, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. Celebrimbor looked up, his eyes dark and hollow. Galdr, he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and desperation. You shouldn't be here. I had to come, Galdr said softly, stepping closer. I couldn't leave you like this. Celebrimbor shook his head, his hands trembling as he clutched the ring. It's too late, Galdr. The darkness, it's inside me. I can't stop it. Galdr's heart broke at the sight of his friend, so consumed by the power of the ring that he could barely recognize him. But he knew that he could not give up, not yet. You're stronger than this, Celebrimbor, he said firmly. You can fight it. You don't have to let the darkness win. Celebrimbor looked at him, his eyes filled with pain. I don't know if I can, he whispered. I've tried, but it's so strong. I can feel it, pulling me deeper, every moment. Galdr stepped closer, his voice soft but determined. Then let me help you. You don't have to do this alone. For a moment, it seemed as though Celebrimbor might listen, might finally let go of the ring and the darkness that had claimed him. But then, from the shadows, the voice returned, cold and insistent, whispering words of power and control. Do not listen to him, Celebrimbor. He does not understand. The power of the ring is yours alone. Do not let them take it from you. Part 5. The Price of Power. The city of Ost-in-Edhil was unrecognizable. What was once a thriving hub of elven artistry and light had become a twisted ruin, consumed by shadows. The sky above was blackened, the stars veiled by an unnatural darkness that seeped from the very ground. The air was thick with the smell of ash and decay, and the eerie silence was broken only by the faint whispers of the nameless voice echoing through the streets. Celebrimbor stood at the heart of the city, in the center of what was once the grand courtyard. Now it was a desolate place, the marble cracked and broken, and the ancient trees that had stood for centuries lay felled and twisted by the dark power that had taken root here. In his hand, the ring gleamed with a sickly light, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. The voice, cold, relentless, echoed in his mind, louder than ever. The power is yours, Celebrimbor. You are the master now. All that you desire can be yours. Just surrender to me, fully. Celebrimbor's hand trembled as he looked down at the ring. He had wanted so much, to create, to craft wonders that would be remembered for all time. But now, he realized the terrible price that desire had exacted. The city, his people, everything he loved was gone, consumed by the darkness that now threatened to overwhelm him. From behind him, a familiar voice called out, "Celebrimbor." He turned to see Elenwy and Galder approaching through the shadows, their faces pale but determined. They had fought their way through the darkness to reach him, though it had cost them dearly. Elenwy's once bright eyes were now filled with sorrow, and Galder's arm hung limp at his side, blood dripping from a deep wound. "Elenwy." "Galder," Celebrimbor whispered, his voice heavy with guilt. "You should not have come. It's too late." "No," Elenwy said firmly, stepping closer. "It's not too late. You can still stop this, Celebrimbor. You can still save what remains." Galder nodded, though pain etched his features. "We'll stand with you, Celebrimbor. But you have to let go of the ring. It's the only way." Celebrimbor looked down at the ring, the weight of it pressing heavily on his soul. He knew they were right. The ring was the source of all this destruction, the key to the darkness that had consumed Eregion. But the power it offered was intoxicating, even now. It whispered promises of glory, of control, of everything he had ever wanted. But then he looked into Elenwy's eyes, those bright, kind eyes that had always seen the best in him. And he realized that he could not bear to see her suffer any more because of his mistakes. He could not allow the darkness to claim her, or Galder, or anyone else. The price was too high. With a deep breath, Celebrimbor closed his eyes and summoned all his strength. The nameless voice screamed in his mind, desperate to hold on, but Celebrimbor fought back, pushing against it with every ounce of what he had left. "No more," he whispered. "I will not be your puppet any longer." The voice held in fury as Celebrimbor raised the ring high above his head. The shadows around him surged, trying to pull him down, but he held firm. With a final, agonized cry, he brought the ring down upon the broken stones at his feet, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the darkness erupted from the broken ring, a torrent of shadow and malice that filled the air with an ear-splitting shriek. The ground trembled as the dark entity that had controlled Celebrimbor for so long was finally released, its form twisting and writhing as it fought against the inevitable. But without the ring to anchor it, the entity could not hold its shape. Slowly, painfully, it began to dissipate, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. The shadows that had consumed Ost-in-Edhil began to retreat, the darkness lifting as the ancient evil was finally banished. Celebrimbor fell to his knees, his strength drained, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he had done. The city was saved, but at a terrible cost. Elenwy rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she held him. "Celebrimbor, you did it. You saved us." But Celebrimbor shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "No. I destroyed us. Everything, everyone, it's all gone because of me." Galder knelt beside them, his face etched with sorrow. "You fought back, Celebrimbor. You didn't let the darkness win. That's what matters." But Celebrimbor could not find comfort in their words. The weight of his actions was too great, the guilt too overwhelming. He had unleashed this horror upon Eregion, and now the city lay in ruins because of his ambition. As the last remnants of the darkness faded into the air, Celebrimbor's vision began to blur. He felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion settling over him, a darkness of a different kind creeping into his mind. He knew then that his time was over, that the price of his power would be paid with his life. With a final, trembling breath, He looked up at Elenwi, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Elenwi's tears fell freely as she held him, her heart breaking at the sight of the friend she had loved and lost. She could feel the life slipping away from him, the light that had once burned so brightly now flickering and fading. And then, with a soft sigh, Celebrimbor was gone. The darkness was lifted from Eregion, but the city would never be the same. The streets were silent, the forges cold, the great halls empty. The elves who had once called this place home were scattered, their spirits broken by the loss of their leader and the devastation that had befallen their city. Elenwi and Galder stood at the edge of the city, their eyes filled with sorrow as they looked out over the ruins. They had survived, but the cost had been high. Too high. "Elrond will help us rebuild," Galder said quietly, though there was little hope in his voice. Elenwi nodded, but her heart was heavy with grief. She knew that the city could be rebuilt, that the light could be restored. But the memory of what had happened here, the memory of Celebrimbor, would haunt them for the rest of their days. As they turned to leave, a soft breeze stirred the air, carrying with it a faint whisper, a whisper of the past, of the power that had once consumed this place. And in that moment, they knew that the shadows would never truly be gone. In the end, only the shadows remember what was lost, and the light that once burned bright in Eregion was extinguished, for a time. Part 6. The Vision of Anatar. Celebrimbor stood alone in the heart of his forge, the embers from the fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. The air was thick with heat and the acrid scent of molten metal, yet the elf felt a deep chill run down his spine. It had been days, perhaps weeks, since he began to dream of a figure cloaked in shadow, a being that whispered promises of power beyond his wildest imaginings. And now, that figure had a name. Anatar. Anatar had first appeared in his dreams, like a distant figure lost in a haze of smoke. At first, Celebrimbor dismissed the visions, attributing them to the weariness that often came after long hours at the forge. But the visions persisted, and with them came a voice. A voice that dripped with honeyed words, so soft yet so powerful that it echoed in Celebrimbor's waking thoughts. "Greatness awaits you, young smith. There is a power buried deep within these lands that only you can unlock." The visions intensified until one night, as the moon bathed Ost-in-Edhil in a pale light, Celebrimbor had a vision unlike any before. The walls of his forge melted away, and he found himself standing on the edge of an abyss, the air around him thick with ash and swirling shadows. A figure stood before him, tall and regal, cloaked in dark robes. His eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, and his presence seemed to twist the very fabric of the world. "I am Anatar, Lord of Gifts," the figure said, his voice as smooth as flowing water. "And I come with a gift for you, Celebrimbor." Celebrimbor felt a cold hand grip his heart. "What gift do you speak of?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anatar smiled, though it was not a kind smile. "The power to create. The power to forge not just weapons, but dominion itself. The power to rival even the Vala, should you desire it." Celebrimbor's mind raced. His grandfather, Fëanor, had once been the greatest craftsman in all of Middle-earth, the forger of the Silmarils. Could he, Celebrimbor, surpass even Fëanor's legendary works? Could he forge something that would last through the ages? Yet a doubt gnawed at the back of his mind. What would such power cost, he asked, his voice faltering. Anatar's eyes flashed. All great power comes with a price. But you are destined for this. You have already taken the first step, have you not? You have already touched the darkness. The words sent a jolt of fear through Celebrimbor. He thought back to the dark metal he had discovered in the forests of Eregion. It had called to him, urged him to craft, to shape it into something magnificent. But each time he worked with it, the shadows around him deepened, and he felt something watching him, something that wanted more. You have only glimpsed what you can become, Celebrimbor, Anatar continued, stepping closer. The metal you found is but a fraction of the true power that lies beneath this world. I can help you unlock it. I can show you how to forge rings of power, rings that will grant you dominion over all who wear them. Think of the glory, the might that could be yours. Celebrimbor's breath caught in his throat. Rings of power? The idea intrigued him, fascinated him. He could bring such unity, such strength to the peoples of Middle-earth. The elves, the dwarves, even men, they could all be united under a single banner. A banner of peace, forged by his hand. But at what cost? The vision began to blur, and Celebrimbor felt himself being pulled back to the waking world. As the forge's walls were formed around him, he stood trembling, the fire's glow casting long shadows that seemed to dance at the edge of his vision. The weight of Anatar's words pressed heavily on his chest. He could still feel the pull of the darkness, the promise of power. But deep within him, a small voice whispered caution. He had heard tales of such whispers before, tales of those who sought power for themselves and paid dearly for it. His own grandfather had been consumed by his obsession with the Silmarils, and it had led to the ruin of his family, his people, and even the world. Was he now walking the same path? That night, Celebrimbor was unable to sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind consumed with visions of the rings of power, the glory they promised, and the shadowy figure of Anatar who stood behind it all. His heart ached with the weight of indecision. He could sense that this was a crossroads, a moment that would shape the future of not only himself, but all of Middle-earth. And so, he made his choice. The next day, Celebrimbor gathered his closest confidants, Elenwi, Galder, and the lion, deep within the chambers of Ost-in-Edhil. He spoke of the visions, the whispers, and the promises of Anatar. The room grew cold as he revealed the truth of what he had seen and what he now intended to do. I must forge these rings, Celebrimbor said, his voice steady but his eyes shadowed. The power they offer is beyond anything we have ever known. But it is a power we can control. With it, we can bring peace, unity, and strength to our people. This is our destiny. The lion, the oldest and wisest among them, frowned deeply. You speak of power, but what of the cost? Power like this is never free, Celebrimbor. You play with forces that even the Vala might fear. Elenwi's eyes were wide with concern. You don't have to do this. There must be another way. The shadow you speak of, this Anatar, it sounds like a trap. Like something Morgoth himself would have laid. But Celebrimbor was resolute. I will not be controlled by fear. I am not my grandfather. I will not fall as Fëanor did. This power is ours to wield, and we will wield it wisely. Galder, who had long been envious of Celebrimbor's skill, saw an opportunity in this. If anyone can harness this power, it is you, Celebrimbor. And when you succeed, you will be remembered as the greatest smith who ever lived. The lion shook his head, his voice low and filled with foreboding. "This path you walk, it is darker than you know. I pray you find your way back before it is too late." With that, the decision was made. For months, Celebrimbor worked tirelessly in his forge, the fires burning day and night. The whispers of Anatar guided him, as did the dark metal he had found. Piece by piece, he forged the rings, each one imbued with a power unlike anything he had ever felt. As he worked, he felt the presence of Anatar stronger than ever, as if the dark figure stood over his shoulder, watching, waiting. Yet, with each ring he completed, the shadows around him grew thicker, darker. His once bright forge was now a place of creeping darkness, where the fires burned a sickly green and the air was thick with the weight of something unseen. But Celebrimbor did not waver. He pressed on, driven by the vision of what could be. The rings of power were nearly complete, and soon he would present them to the elves, the dwarves, and the men of Middle-earth. He would unite them all under a single purpose, a single banner. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the forge was silent and the whispers of Anatar faded, Celebrimbor could feel something else. Something missing. It was as if a piece of himself had been taken, consumed by the very metal he had shaped. Still, he pressed on. And then, one night, Anatar appeared to him again, not in a vision, but in the flesh. The dark figure stepped into the forge, his presence filling the room with a cold, oppressive air. "You have done well, Celebrimbor," Anatar said, his voice smooth and commanding. "The rings are nearly perfect. But there is one more thing you must do." Celebrimbor frowned, his heart pounding in his chest. "What more is there?" "The rings are ready." Anatar smiled, and in that smile, Celebrimbor saw the truth, the terrible, dark truth that had been hidden from him all along. "There is a master ring, Celebrimbor. A ring to rule them all." The words sent a shiver down Celebrimbor's spine. "What do you mean?" Anatar stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You know what I mean. To control the others, to truly harness their power, there must be a ring forged in secret. A ring that answers to no one but you." Celebrimbor's blood ran cold. He understood now. He understood everything. The whispers, the promises of power, the shadow that had crept into his heart, it had all been leading to this. A master ring, a ring of ultimate dominion. And he knew then, in that moment, that he had been deceived. "No," Celebrimbor whispered, stepping back from the forge. "I will not do it. I will not forge such a thing." But Anatar's smile only widened, and his voice, once so smooth and kind, now dripped with venom. "You already have, Celebrimbor. The shadows have claimed you." Celebrimbor stumbled, his vision blurring as the forge around him darkened. The weight of his choices pressed down upon him, and he realized, too late, the price he had paid for power. The future was set. The darkness would come, and Celebrimbor would be its herald. "No, no," he whispered, as the shadows consumed him and the fires of the forge died. Thank you for joining us on this dark and thrilling journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell right below so you never miss a tale of intrigue and adventure. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future stories. Drop them in the comments. Your support means the world and helps our community grow. Let's keep building this amazing storytelling world together.